Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Morgan. This is my channel Pisces Paperbacks, and I haven't made a video in 9 months. The last video I made was me rereading Red, White, and Royal Blue and reacting to the movie that came out in August. So it's been since August, and the last time I did a wrap-up was in July. Well, I haven't read that much since July because low-key I've been through several reading slumps. It's currently May 19th when I'm filming this, and I haven't finished a book since January. But I'd like to be reading again, and I want to make videos again. So I'm starting off with this, letting you guys know everything I've read since the last time we spoke. I actually already filmed this video, and I was trying to make it like fun and quirky, so I was doing it while making cookies, chocolate chip cookies. It was like an hour-long video, unedited, and I did that earlier tonight, and I fucked up the cookies, and I'm so pissed off about it that I deleted the video and I'm refilming it now. The very first thing I read in last August that I didn't read in July that I haven't told you about is Rogue Protocol, the third book in the Murderbot series by Martha Wells. I love this series. It is a sci-fi novella series with, I think there's a couple, like 2 full-length novels in the series now, but they're mostly novellas following Murderbot, who is like this security robot in the future who has hacked its own programming so that it can like not follow orders. It doesn't have to follow direct orders, and all it wants to do is watch its soap operas and vibe and not have to deal with annoying, irrational humans, and it keeps finding itself in these situations where it has to protect humans. So the first book was a 5-star, loved it. It was like a murder mystery. The second book was a little bit more like spy thrillers, also gave it 5 stars. This third book, I feel like the emotional beats it was hitting became like a little bit repetitive, and it didn't hit as hard for me, so I think I'd give this one like 3.5, 4 stars. It follows Murderbot as it is trying to get into a specific space station that kind of has been cut off and is investigating the reasons it's been cut off, and kind of it starts interacting with this other group of humans who are also looking to figure out what happened at this space station. I think Murderbot is so funny and so charmingly self-deprecating. It's just, I love it so much. I love that series so much. The next book I finished was Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect, which is a collection of essays by various authors. These are not like memoir essays or like personal essays. These are academic essays, probably published in some journals or sociological studies, and they are talking about police violence and violence done in basically every step of the judicial system, as well as like alternatives to policing. I've been reading it very, very slowly. These are, as I've said, academic essays. They have footnotes, they are very in-depth, and they often have language that I'm not familiar with. I found that it was best for me to like really read one essay at a time, several months apart, because if I was trying to read it like just read chapter, I like wasn't absorbing any of it, and I also wasn't understanding any of it. I do recommend this book. I think it was very interesting, very informative, and a really like wide lens look at different aspects of police brutality. I do recommend reading it with somebody or a group to talk about it with. It feels like a book that would serve really well in a classroom setting, and I wish I had read it in some sort of academic discussion-based setting, because I feel like sometimes that helps me absorb information better to just like talk it out with people. But I do think it was very well done. Highly recommend. After that, I did want to switch it up to something a little bit lighter, so I reread Mating the Huntress by Talia Hibbert. I don't remember what year I originally read this, but this is a Halloween novella about a romance between a werewolf and a werewolf hunter. The basic premise is that the werewolf keeps showing up to this coffee shop because he knows for a fact that the woman behind the counter is his true love. Like, he can smell it, he just knows. And so he thinks that he's just showing up and being awkward, and she's just being nice because he's like being awkward, and he's eventually gonna work up the courage to ask her out. But she is from a family of werewolf hunters and is planning to kill him. So, and knows that he's a werewolf and is planning to kill him. So that's kind of like the conflict. The first time I read this, I gave it 5 stars, and I just have to say, I wish I had not reread this, because the second time I gave it 3 stars. I found it, for some reason, this time, I did not find it charming. I did not find it as funny. I found it almost cringy. Like, there were some parts I was like, ugh, okay, it's a bit much. And I remember the first time, like, loving it. So this is one time where I truly wish I just had left well enough alone and not reread it. After that, I actually read Red, White, and Royal Blue again. I have it right here. This is the movie cover. The last time we talked about this book is the occasion in August when I vlogged it, so I won't get into this too much. It's a romance between the son of the first female president and a prince of England. It's like a secret romance trope. Starts off as like very brief enemies to lovers. I fucking love this book. I gave it 5 stars the first time I read it, and that love has skyrocketed so much. I know the movie is cringy, okay? You don't have to tell me, I am aware. And yet, I've watched it like 7 or 8 times. It has taken over my life. I know in my video, I'm like a little hesitant to be like, I loved it, because it does have things about it that are like, really? I cannot explain to you how much I love that movie. It's like my whole Twitter, it's my whole Instagram, it's like all I look online for. When they announced that the sequel's coming out, I started crying. Like, it's too much. I have a tattoo. I got a History tattoo. Like, this is serious. And I now own 4 copies, all different editions. And when I go to Ireland next month to go to the Taylor Swift concert, I'm going to buy the Waterstones edition because it's going to be my only chance to get it. And I want it. And so I love this book so much. I love this movie so much, and I love Taylor Zaccar Perez. That's my husband. That's my husband. Next 3 books I'm going to talk about together, even though I did not read them like one after another in this time period. But I reread the Last Binding trilogy by Freya Marske. The whole series is a fantasy romance series set in Edwardian England, where there is a secret magical society, and there is some great evil force kind of conspiracy brewing in the government. And so these are 3 queer romances, all about different couples, investigating that conspiracy that is growing and is kind of targeting them as people who could potentially undo the evil that is kind of being done. So it starts off with Robin and Edwin. The Marvellous Light is still my favorite of the 3. It's very opposites attract, kind of has a bureaucratic setting that I really enjoy. And then the second book is A Restless Truth, right here. This is a sapphic romance between Robin's sister Maud and a new character named Violet that she meets on a cruise liner crossing the Atlantic. So this book is a limited setting murder mystery where it starts off with a character being murdered, and then they are just investigating while on this ship crossing the Atlantic, searching for an artifact of some kind. I also really like this one, not as much. I gave this one 4.5 stars, where I guess I gave the first one 5 stars, just because I like sex scenes in books, obviously, look at where we are, but I really like when the sex scenes have some sort of dynamic emotional component that is moving the relationship in some way, that is exploring the relationship in some way. While I know Freya Marske can do it, because there is a sex scene in this book that really does do it for me in terms of like an enjoyable read, there are 2 other sex scenes in this book that I just don't find emotionally compelling. And I went to an author event where Freya Marske was speaking and signing books for the 3rd book in the series, and she actually does talk about purposely writing those scenes being physical exploration, not emotional. And so I know it's on purpose, but it still means I liked this book less. So I still gave it 4 stars. I love the plot, but it's just not my favorite of the 3. Last, but absolutely not least, we have A Power Unbound. Beautiful, stunning. This is, all 3 are also signed because I brought my copies of the other books to this author event. So they all just say like for Morgan and then Freya's signature. So cute. This book is about Jack, Lord Hawthorne, so that's the tall one with the cane, and then Alan, he is a journalist that they meet on the ship in book 2, who kind of becomes embroiled in this magical conspiracy, even though he himself is not magical. So this book explores the dynamic between Jack and Alan. They are combative, they're at each other's throats from the moment they meet. They just do not get along, and yet there is an undeniable draw and chemistry between them. There is also real exploration of like power dynamics during the sexual scenes that I found very compelling as a reader. I thought it was a really, really good romance. I loved this one. I thought it was so good, and as a conclusion to the trilogy, I think it was very well done. I highly recommend these books. You do need to read them in order, and it is one overarching plot. So, like, if that's not, you know, your thing, then you're missing out, but I respect you. Next, I read The Duke Starts a Scandal by Sophie Jordan. This is a historical romance, mass market paperback that I don't even know where I got, but I know that I bought it because of the cover. Okay, look at this cover. This is clearly, to me, referencing, I will find it and put it on the screen, but there was a movie poster about like a psychological thriller that looked like a weird psychosexual historical romance with a woman doming this guy against a wall. I will put it up here. And so I bought this because it's clearly referencing that. And when I tell you there is not a single scene in this book that looks anything like this cover, not even one. So automatically it's down there. It's not a winner because I'm disappointed. But also, there is not that much tension in this book. So let me tell you what it's about. It is about Lucian. He has recently inherited a dukedom, which is a big surprise because his dad kind of was like the third son of like a cousin of the previous duke, something like that. And so Lucian did not grow up in wealth. He actually grew up in extreme poverty. His mother had been driven to prostitution, and he also worked as a prostitute in the past. So he has this history, and he is like determined to avoid scandal or any interest in his past. He needs to be absolutely perfect, which means he cannot have an interest in his housekeeper. And so Susanna is his housekeeper. She's fairly young for the position, but she's driven, she's good at her job. And the second they meet, they get off on the wrong foot, and he's like, I gotta figure out a way to fire her. And she's like, I'm gonna be so good at my job that he cannot fire me. And then so the tension is basically just like, they're kind of hot for each other, but he is her boss. So there's class differences in this, which is a trope that I really like. It's something that I enjoy about historical romances. But really overall, I don't think this is that well written. I think it was extremely average. There's really no tension in terms of the plot. I don't think the sexual tension was that well done. And the antagonist that appears is so over the top misogynistic and crude in a way that is probably realistic for the time, but like feels very jarring as a reader. I think I gave this like 2.5 stars. It just really wasn't for me, which is disappointing because I bought it. After that, I read a fun one. I was like doing my laundry. It was the middle of December. I was like, what is available as an audiobook that'll be a quick little listen? And you know what I picked? A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I don't really care about Christmas. I'm Jewish, but I love a ghost story and I love whimsy and I love A Christmas Carol, especially Muppets Christmas Carol and the Jim Carrey one. But I'd never read it, and I've never read any Dickens. So I was like, let me listen to it. Maybe it'll be fun. Maybe it'll be interesting. Literally 1 minute into the audiobook, I was like, this is hilarious. It's written so well. I already love it. I'm obsessed. I listened to it 3 times in 1 week. And every single time I was like, this is so good. I loved it. I've never read any Dickens before, and I didn't expect it to be so funny. Like, it was very witty and funny. Like, really good. And there were legitimate jump scares. There were certain points where I was, like, creeped out because it is a ghost story. I love that there's no Santa in it. I'm not into that. But I absolutely loved it. This is A Christmas Carol and other Christmas writings, so I don't really know what else is in here, but this was a gift. My friend got this for me as a gift because I talked about how much I loved the book so much. So, yeah, I just like 5 stars. Very surprised, but very into it. After that, I was like, I should read more classics. And this is not quite so classic, but it is like a modern classic, and that is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. This is not the first time I've read this book. I actually read it for the first time in 8th grade, but I didn't remember anything about it, and I was like, let's just read it. So if you don't know, Murder on the Orient Express is a Hercule Poirot mystery. So he is the detective, and he is on this sleeper train traveling across Europe, and one night it got stopped in the middle of the night, in the middle of a snowy valley. It's been snowed in, and during that night, one of the passengers on this train car is killed. He's stabbed, and so Hercule Poirot interviews everybody else on this train car, who it has to be, and by putting together their stories, he comes to the conclusion of like finding out what the solution is to this mystery. So this is a book with like very little action. All of the action takes place off stage, and the primary bulk of this story is talking. And I was still enraptured. I was fascinated. I was so interested, and I wanted to keep reading. And really, what else can you ask for? I thought this was so well done, and it makes me want to read more classics, and it makes me want to read more mysteries, and it makes me want to read more Agatha Christie. And like, what else is it trying to do other than make me read more classic mysteries by Agatha Christie? Like, that's all I could ask for. 5 stars. Loved it. After this, I dove into Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics by Marc Lamont Hill. This is a nonfiction kind of exploring the American political relationship to Israel as a state, as well as inherent contradictions in the way that Israel and its right to exist, or Israel's right to exist, is used as justification for the lack of right for Palestinians to live, and how Palestine has also been treated in the past 70 years of the existence of the state of Israel. I found this fascinating. I think it was written really digestibly. Like, I understood what was happening even though I did not study politics in the 60s and 70s. Like, that's not something that I'm really aware of. It was explained really well to the lay person who doesn't have like a history understanding or like studying this subject. Highly recommend. I don't really rate like nonfiction as much anymore, especially when it's like political nonfiction, but I do think this one is, you should check it out, especially with what's been going on. If you're somebody who's like, I can't speak on it, I don't know enough. First of all, you shouldn't need to know the entire 80-year history of a conflict to understand that genocide is bad. But also, you should read this book, which is not very long. The audiobook is fine, and it kind of gives you the rundown on the way that American politics interact with the idea of Israel as a political tool. So, recommend. After that, switching it up again, I read Carmilla, which, look at this beautiful copy I have. It is illustrated, and while I listened to the audiobook, I didn't read the physical book. I am so glad that I own this. It's stunning. Carmilla is one of the OG vampire stories. I think it is the OG. It predates Dracula, and it follows a girl named Laura. She lives a very isolated life in the countryside of some European country, don't know, with just her father, when suddenly through events, they are kind of asked to take in and care for temporarily this girl around Laura's age named Carmilla. And Carmilla just has some odd habits. She tends to sleep in really late. She's very pale. And Laura starts experiencing these strange symptoms, weird dreams where she's feeling a presence in her house, and there's odd sickness sweeping the town nearby. And obviously it's a vampire story, so you know where it's going, but this is kind of the origin of a lot of those like common vampire myths. So I thought that was fascinating. It's also low-key, and not even very low-key, has a lot of sapphic undertones, a lot of queer subtext. I actually, when I was reading this, went on Goodreads, and one of my professors from college loved him. He taught my queer novels of the 21st century class, and I followed him on Goodreads. We follow each other on Goodreads after I graduated. Lovely, love him. He reviewed Carmilla, and he was like, I read in another queer anthology that this is a queer story, and I really feel like you need to dig deep to see that subtext. I just didn't think it was really there. 3 stars. And I was like, need to dig deep. They kiss on the mouth. Like, not described or written in the way that a contemporary novel would describe that. But, like, Carmilla literally begs Laura to let them be buried together so they can never be parted. Like, it's not deep. They're constantly holding hands. Laura enters an intense, quick friendship with another girl. What is more queer than that? Anyway, that pissed me off. I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was very good. Didn't love it, but was very impressed by some aspects of it and found it very entertaining. Next, I read The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. This is a nonfiction book following the lives of the women who used to paint radium on clock dials at factories in New Jersey and Ohio. I loved this. I feel like this is often recommended for people who liked Code Girls, and I completely agree. Because they are nonfiction books that have a specific topic that they're following, but it's not following the topic as much as it's following specific women who were key players in the lifetime of this subject. So Kate Moore, the author of this book, is actually not a historian, and she's not even American. She is a British theater director who directed a play that had been written about the lives of the Radium girls, and when she was doing research, she was so moved by the idea of these women. She was like reading nonfiction, whatever. She realized that all of the nonfiction that had been written and studied about this topic was really about the legal impact of the Radium girls, aka the creation of OSHA and consequences for having workplace health violations. She decided that she wanted to speak to maybe some of the descendants of these women and see if she could learn more about them. And so this book truly introduces you to these women as people, as characters, following them through several years, sometimes decades of their life, seeing how the radium affects them, affects their families, and what action they maybe took against their workplace, and like how did that play out for them. I cried twice reading this book, and it was just really beautifully written. It's really beautifully written. I will say the author just takes some liberties in terms of like imagining what they were thinking. So if you read nonfiction and you're like, I can tell that the author is like making something up a little bit, maybe this isn't for you. I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I almost bought it for my mom because I thought she would like it to read for like Hanukkah, but I ended up getting her the Barbara Streisand memoir, which I knew that she would like. So I did that instead. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Divine Rivals is a new adult or like upper YA romantasy. It follows Iris and Roman. They are rival journalists at like a newspaper in this fantasy world where there are 2 gods who are at war. Biggest complaint is that the world building is like, why is there a war? Like, what's happening? And by the time you get to the end, there's a bit of a cliffhanger, and I'm like, okay, there's going to be more world building in the second book of this duology. But in this first book, I was left with a lot of questions about the world and how it functioned, what things were doing. But that's aside the point. Iris is a journalist. She's working at this newspaper. Her brother has, several months prior to the book starting, gone off to fight in the war, and she hasn't heard from him since. So she's left at home alone, trying to support herself and her alcoholic mother, and she's been writing these letters on her typewriter and sticking them in her closet, and then having magical letters kind of returned to her from a pen pal that she does not know. And so she's been confiding in this person, and she is just so interested in who they are and being able to have someone to talk to. And so Roman is both her coworker, and unbeknownst to her, he is the person who has been writing the letters back to her. He knows, she does not know. And so he's also very into her, and she does not realize her feelings yet. So that's kind of the dynamic they're working with. Through events, they kind of end up more together, hanging out more, and she kind of comes to learn more about him and be like, oh, maybe I don't hate this guy. Maybe I actually really like him. And I actually really liked the romance in this. I gave it 4 stars. I do highly recommend it for people who are looking for romantasy or fantasy romance of any kind. I thought it was very well done, and I am excited for the second book, even though I've gotten and then returned the audiobook like twice in the last 5 months because I just haven't been reading. Up next, and my first book of 2024, I listened to this on audio, so this is not the edition I read. You'll also notice the cover has fallen off. I read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I have read this book before. I read it in 5th grade, and while I remembered like the big sweeping plot points, I did not remember most of this book. So I knew it would be safe to reread, and I was hoping that it would start off my year of classics. I'm trying to read more classics, as I said earlier, and I did really like this. I gave it like 3.5 stars. I think a lot of people who say this is their favorite classic read it as children, which is not a bad thing. It is a book for children, for like young teenagers and kind of growing people. So I think that's totally fine. But I think people forget that it's pretty preachy, like especially in part 1, which follows the 4 sisters over 1 calendar year. Pretty much every chapter ends with their mother giving like basically a sermon to them, like being like, and this is the lesson that we're learning today, and this is what the Bible says. And after a while, as an adult, I was like, okay, I literally get it. Like, I get it. It's fine. But I really loved kind of the slice of lifeness of watching these 4 girls kind of grow into their adolescence and young womanhood and how they learn and the people that they're growing up to be. And I feel like this book did a really, really good job, better than most, of being like, in part 2, you see them as young adults and how they've kind of grown into being women and what their ambitions and their passions are. And I think this book does a phenomenal job of being like, these are the events, like small, maybe inconsequential things that maybe you wouldn't put in a book, but you as a person would remember and would shape you, and this is how that affects you as an adult. And I loved it. I thought it was that part of it was so interesting. And I did cry, only once, but I really liked this book. I think it's not a favorite. 3.5 stars. It's not terrible, but it's not one that I'm going to reread again. I am excited to watch the movies. I've never seen either of the movies, the Winona Ryder one or the newer Saoirse Ronan, Greta Gerwig one, but I am interested because I think I will really like them. After that, I had a good streak. First, I read The Writing Retreat by Julia Barts. This is like the most bizarre thriller I've ever read. I don't really think it's a thriller. I think it's more like true suspense. Like, the thing that keeps you reading is like just the terror of like what's gonna happen next, but not in like a horror terror way, but just like a stressed out way. I loved this, and usually I don't love books where I have to keep stopping because I'm stressed the fuck out, but I couldn't stop reading. I like needed to know what was gonna happen because it was just so wacky. This book follows an author, a writer whose name I don't remember. She is experiencing like the worst writer's block of her life, but also she gets unexpectedly invited to go to the writing retreat that's being hosted by her favorite author. This woman is reclusive. She doesn't really do interviews. She lives on an isolated estate in upstate New York. Like, it's a big deal that she got invited. So she's packing up, she's going there. She finds out that one of the other girls going to this retreat is her ex-best friend she hasn't spoken to in a year, who she had an altercation with that we don't really know what happened. So, you know, there's the stress of kind of anticipating that, but then she gets to the retreat and it's like, things are not quite right. And things keep being weird. Every time she turns around, something weird is fucking happening. And I loved it. I highly recommend. I think it was great. I gave it 5 stars. And then after that, I read The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, which is her memoir that was released in 2023. I thought this was phenomenal. The overall voice that I think is just the way that she speaks and talks and like thinks is this simplicity that cuts to the heart of a problem in a way that I think is both wise beyond her years and heartbreakingly naive. And I think it was so effective. If she had a ghostwriter, which I'm sure she did, they were phenomenal. They worked together with her so well. I think this was so well done. I know that a lot of the biggest points, especially with Justin Timberlake and the juiciest gossip, kind of already got clipped and was in news, like headlines and like viral videos, and people talked about them. But I highly recommend reading this if you're interested at all, because I feel like there's a lot of smaller moments that hit just as hard as those like bigger juicy gossip moments, and I just thought it was so well done. 5 stars. We're getting to the end, guys. I believe in us. Next, I read Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a noir detective vampire novel. This is an alternate history, like in like the 80s, maybe 90s, where at some point in like the mid-1900s, vampires were revealed and have kind of taken over the world, essentially, especially in Central America. I believe this book takes place in Mexico City, which has kind of become a stronghold against vampires. There's no vampires in the city, except it's run by gangs instead. So the main character, at least in my brain, the main character is this boy who kind of was caught up in a gang, but is now kind of on his own, and he kind of gets taken in almost, not taken in to like live with, but taken in emotionally by this girl who is on the run from other vampires. She is also a vampire. She's kind of like a cool, special kind of vampire. And then there's also a human detective who is helping investigate some other murders that have been occurring from other vampires in the city. And I thought it was okay. I found it very dry. Honestly, I think I gave it like 2.5, 3 stars. And I don't really have much to say more about it. After I'm done talking about it right now, I don't think I will ever think about this book ever again. Next, I read another huge winner, and that was The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman. This is the 4th book in the Thursday Murder Club series, and the only one I don't own because I don't believe the paperback is out yet. I loved this book. I think it's the problem is I'm about to say, like, it's my 3rd favorite of the 4, which makes it sound like it's towards the bottom, but really it's just like, it's so good. It's so good, and it's heartbreaking. There's one part in the middle where I literally sobbed for like an hour. Don't know. I feel like this is one of the books where watching all the different threads come together, because these are books where there's kind of a lot of seemingly disparate parts that come together in the end. And in this book particularly, watching those threads tie up at the end was so satisfying. I loved this book. I loved where he took the characters. I'm kind of sad that he's taking a break from this series. It's the first time in 4 years where there's not going to be a new Thursday Murder Club book, but he is starting a new mystery series with like a different premise that I'm really excited about. But I just love this series so much. If you don't know, the Thursday Murder Club is about 4 like 80-year-olds in a retirement home who find themselves investigating murders and just using their different skills and their different personalities to kind of reach the solutions that they're looking for. And I just love them so much. The characters are so unique and charming and lovely and funny, and it's written so well and so engagingly. I can't even begin to say how much I love this series. 2 more books. We're getting there. The next book I want to talk about is called Maybe There Are Witches by Jude Atwood. This is the 2nd to last book I read, and I'm gonna get through this. It is a middle grade book about a girl who moves with her mother to the mother's hometown into the bed and breakfast that the grandmother used to run. The grandmother has now passed away. And while she's kind of exploring her new home, she discovers this like diary that seems to be written by her ancestor from 150 years ago. And this diary is not just a diary, it's addressed to the main character, and it is predicting things that are happening. So she's kind of become convinced by reading this diary, and the diary being like, this is gonna happen, and then it does, that this is a trustworthy source and she should listen to her ancestor who seems to have been able to predict the future. And this ancestor is like, girl, something bad is happening in your town, and there is an evil guy who's gonna come and try to fuck shit up, and you gotta deal with it. So she's now kind of running around investigating with some new friends that she's made at school. It's one of those kind of middle grades, and I liked it. It was okay. I didn't love the writing style, and I did like the twist. There was a twist at the end, and I'm not a reader who's looking to try and figure out twists ahead of time, like foreshadowing. Like, I can pick up on it, but it's not something that I'm actively searching out to try and figure out if there's going to be a twist in what it is. So I was very pleasantly surprised by the twist. I thought it was very well done, and I did like the characters, even though I found them a bit overly precocious for 12-year-olds, like 13-year-olds, you know what I mean? But overall, it was interesting. I only picked it up because it has the word witch in the title, and I was, at the time, trying to do the buzzword readathon kind of prompts every month. I will never think about this book again after I'm done talking about it right now, but I think I gave it 3 stars. And last but not least, I read Sweet on the Greek by Talia Hibbert. This is a very cute, quick romance. I do not remember their names. I don't remember their names. The main character, it starts off telling you about her tragic backstory. This is a book in like a series, like a romance series, where they're all kind of standalones but a little bit connected. So you get all of the context you need in the prologue, just like all of the context you need. And the context is that in the previous book, the main character in this book's boyfriend was actually only dating her because he was obsessed with and stalking her best friend. And it kind of ends with him kidnapping the friend, and like he dies in a dramatic way. So now this book starts off and the main character is like, clearly I have the worst taste imaginable and I should not be trusted to date men at all, because it just turns out bad for everyone involved. So she's sworn off dating. She is at this friend's wedding, and she happens to run into a now recently retired soccer player who is kind of like at a loss as to what to do with the rest of his life now that he's not playing soccer anymore. And he basically sees her and is immediately like, she's so beautiful. She's the most beautiful one I've ever seen. I'm in love and I need to be with her. I need to be with her in any possible way, shape, or form. And so he tries to ask her out, and she like freaks out because she's like, I can't date men because I have terrible taste. And so he's like, okay, well, I'm going to this party with my former teammates, and I just don't know how to say no, and I need somebody to help me stay away from women who won't stop accosting me. Can you please pretend to be my girlfriend? And so that's the premise. It's a fake dating story. And honestly, overall, from what we get in the book, it is extremely sexy and it's extremely cute. Like, I actually really, really liked, like, most of the book. My biggest complaint, and honestly, it's a major complaint that kind of undermines any really super positive feelings I have about the book, is that there is a section of time in their story where they are just emailing back and forth, getting to know each other before going to this party. And we do not see any of it. We do not see a single one of their emails. She sends the first email to be like, guess I should get to know a little bit more about you. And then it cuts to them arriving at the party, and she's like, now the person that she's been emailing back and forth with for weeks is right here, and he's so funny and charming. And it's like, we don't get to see any of that. That's when the relationship is developing. That would have been the best part. So honestly, that kind of like brings it down pretty far, but I still think I gave this book 4 stars. I just think that it was okay. Like, it was pretty good. It was an extremely enjoyable time. That's the thing about Talia Hibbert books. I know I was just complaining about Mating the Huntress earlier, but generally Talia Hibbert books are just such a fun time. Like, every time. So I had fun. But in terms of like actual quality, I don't think this was her best. Oh my god, I've been talking for 45 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about and what you thought of them, or if you're planning to read any of them. Leave me a comment, I'd love to hear it. And I will talk to you guys soon. Bye!